Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week, we're going to continue our deep dive into the destination employer methodology and why you as a company should aspire to become a destination employer. Now, just very quick recap. We define a destination employer as a company that's developed a reputation in the marketplace as a location where top talent can go to fast track their careers. That's what they get out of it. But you as the employer, as the entrepreneur, as the founder, what do you get out of it? Consistent access to top talent and the ability to keep them on your team for longer than industry averages. How do we do that? Well, that's what this little mini-series is all about. In the first episode, we went over more detail about what a destination employer is. In last week's episode, we looked at the first phase of the destination employer process, which is the attraction phase. We talked about how to build a candidate attraction engine and where to put that engine and how to engage with top talent so that they're interested in what you have to say. And you can break through to that holy grail of the business development team, and that's the hidden talent that you need that really drive markets. This week, we're going to look at the second of three phases, the recruitment phase, also known as, now that we've got their attention and engagement, how do we not screw it up and get them to join our teams? And next week, we'll wrap it up with the final phase, the retention phase. Now, just like last week, we looked at the four key components that comprise that attraction phase. In this week, our four components that comprise the job recruitment phase are number one, the employee referral program. In other words, what do you do in your company to attract the attention of your team so that they give you referrals to top talent? It will surprise nobody on this call, I'm sure, or in this episode, that referrals are, have been, and will always be your best source for top talent. Why? Because it has a built-in level of trust because it's coming from a known source. You'll have a level of engagement here that you wouldn't otherwise have. The second key element as it relates to the recruitment phase is the job order intake form. What do I mean by that? Job order intake, assuming that you have an internal recruitment phase or you're working with an external recruitment partner or someone other than the hiring manager themselves is the one who's filling this role, is the portion whereby you develop a list of all the required and nice-to-have skills, and you put together an accurate job description to go find a person to fill that role. Now, the reason why I led with companies that have an internal recruitment team or that use an external recruitment partner is because this place is very often where the ball is dropped. Your hiring manager creating that job order needs to be able to accept feedback from the recruiters. Why? Because the recruiters are the ones who have their ear to the ground in the recruitment market and are most likely more aware of current events and what's happening in that space. And very often they will receive job order descriptions that are simply unrealistic or that have conflicting skills, especially in the startup space where we very often hire generalists that can do many things, some of those that don't necessarily go together. What I've seen happen often is in an earlier stage company, a person comes aboard with a skill, and during their time and tenure with that company, they develop 3 or 4 other relevant skills. And when they leave, that manager tries to replicate that employee when he left, not when he joined. And that, as you might imagine, is difficult because, again, very often those skills don't typically come up together, at least not any kind of depth. The third key element is the interview process itself. Here, the most important thing to remember is efficiency and speed. I'm not for a second suggesting that you don't adequately vet the people that you're looking to make an offer to. I am saying that time kills all deals. And the more length, the more complexity, the more people you involve, the more steps that you create, the more likely it is that top talent who will always have other options will drop out of your interview process. I will say this now. If it's not a C-level role, it shouldn't take you more than a month to fill any permanent role. If it's a junior role, you should be filling that in a week or two, especially if you're taking our advice and building proactive pipelines based on your hiring plans so that you're able to bring in talent on demand when necessary. But if your interview process is 8 or 9 interviews over 5 or 6 weeks for a junior or mid-level person, you are going to lose an obscene amount of top talent. They will not put up with that silliness. No one benefits from that. The fourth part is the offer process. Now, the offer process seems like it should just be the last step of the interview process. But I'm here to tell you, there are steps in the offer process that are important. And if speed kills all deals in the interview process, it's even more so here. Why? Because the further down through this process we go, the more emotional folks get. And we'll talk about that more here in just a minute. But the offer process, like the interview process, has to be efficient and it has to be timely. So it's beyond the context of a single episode to cover this whole thing, just like we did with the attraction phase. Let's cover some usable techniques and strategies that you can implement right away as soon as you're done with this call and share a little bit more info. So those are the 4 key elements: your employee referral program, your job order intake, your interview process, and your offer process. Those 4 key elements of the 12 most directly map to the recruitment process and are the parts that comprise this. So here's some things to kind of keep in mind, as you're working through your recruitment phase. Number 1, like I jokingly said at the beginning, our main job here is now that we've got the engagement of top talent, let's not screw it up. So now that we've earned that engagement and attraction phase, we want to make sure that we don't screw it up very simply by staying focused on them. That candidate does not have a deep connection to your organization yet. They're looking at your job order through the lens of what's in it for them. And the more that we talk about what's in it for them, the more that we focus on their wants and their needs, the more engaged that they will be, the more invested in this role they will become, and the more, frankly, mistakes that they'll put up with from you going through the interview process. So does that mean that we skip all our qualifying questions and just talk about comp and benefits and what they get out of it? Of course it doesn't. But we have to stay focused on them. The more that we can frame our conversation through the lens of what's in it for the candidate, the more likely they are, again, to engage with us throughout the whole process. Why? Think for a minute of the message you're sending by doing that. The message that you're sending here is we care about your outcome. Which, spoiler alert, is one of the things we're going to be talking about next week in retention. People only care about your opinion and your position to the extent that they believe that you care about their outcomes, their position, and what they're trying to achieve. And by communicating that early on here, we're building out our retention framework before they've even decided if they want to accept an offer or not. So that's the first thing. The next thing, and I guess maybe a little bit of a step backwards, is the job order intake. I mentioned this earlier. I'm going to mention it again here. A recruiter needs to have the ability to push back on a hiring manager if that job description isn't what it needs to be. Now, many of you know, if you've been longtime listeners of the show, that I work predominantly in the technology and cybersecurity and AI space. Those are the areas where I do the most work. And a lot of that is in government contracting. So it's those things inside of state or federal roles. And one of the things about that space is those fake folks always have a million options. One other truth there is, and I know this is a generalization, but more often than not, the hiring managers in these roles They became technology managers because they're passionate about building cool stuff. They became cybersecurity managers because they're excited by the security space and about making things more secure. Very few of them became technology or cybersecurity managers because they enjoy the human resources function of their role. For many, if not most of them, hiring and the HR component is their least favorite part of their job. Because of that, what I've seen very, very often is that hiring manager, when they're looking to refill a role, will dust off the last job description that they had that's similar, give that to the recruiter and say, go to market. And they won't really seriously consider their current needs until they start seeing resumes that they can give feedback on. The problem there, of course, is they wind up making the recruiters source people that they would never hire. So when that recruiter gets that original job order, they need to have the authority within the organization to push back and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Hiring Manager, I noticed that this is the old tech stack. Can you update it for me, please? Hey, so-and-so left the organization. That leaves a gap in this skill set. It's not reflected here. Is that intentional? They need to be able to ask questions back from that hiring manager so they're not wasting people's time. And that, my friends, is a huge thing. Number one, that hiring manager gets their time wasted by seeing people that they would never hire because a job description that they gave isn't going to source the candidates that they need. Number two, that recruiter who likely has too many roles on their desk to do the job they should anyway is now sourcing people that aren't even going to have a chance. But number three, folks, please remember this. You're damaging your employer brand by yanking people's chains, okay? When you put out bad job descriptions that cause you to source far more people than you need, you're leaving a bad taste in the mouth of people unnecessarily. Protect your employer brand. It will serve you for the entirety of your organization if you take care of it, and this is one of those ways. Again, the recruiter needs to be able to push back on that hiring manager if the job description isn't good. Extended off of that, they need to truly understand the real interview process. By that I mean, when they ask you, how long will it take you to give me feedback on submitted resumes? That manager should not reply with, I'll reply within 24 hours, if that's not the truth, because that recruiter is going to share that information with their candidates. And now that incorrect information is going to be extended to the candidate who's waiting for feedback, for 3 days when they were told it would be a day. So once again, damaging that nascent relationship and hurting your employer brand overall. Okay, so keep that in mind. Job order intake, interview process as it relates to the hiring manager. Interviews need to be efficient. Shorter is better. And we want the person at the lowest level in your organization to make that decision to be the one in charge of it. In startups, founders almost always want to meet everybody, and I get that. And founders have a superpower when it comes to recruitment because there's the mystique, cultural mystique in the United States around founders. So early stage, when that founder can make the time to interview people, they are an asset. But two things on that. Number one, I've yet to meet a founder with a whole lot of free time on their hands. So they should be the last person in the interview. And we should be booking that out as early as possible to make sure that it happens. And number two, when your organization gets to a point that you cannot schedule that interview in a reasonable amount of time, then despite how the founder feels about it, they should not be a part of the process anymore because they're going to cost us top talent. That superpower ability they have as a recruiter is minimized by their unavailability or inavailability. So we want the person lowest in the organization who has the ability to make that hiring decision to be the one who's responsible for it. Why? It will happen faster. Fewer senior people's time will be taken. And we're training our lower level managers on how we want things done and to value speedy decisions, which outside the context of recruitment is a skill we want them to have. Remember, and I'm skipping ahead to leadership, we want to train our junior managers to manage the way we want them to manage. And this is one of those things. Empower the person lowest in the organization who's competent to make this decision. If you're a founder of a 200-person company, you should not be interviewing entry-level people. If you're the CIO of a 200-person company, you shouldn't be interviewing entry-level help desk people. You just don't have the time to make that happen. And you're stealing the opportunity from a more junior manager to learn how to do this and how to make these decisions. Next up, questions that we often ignore. Now, remember, if you look at retention, which in my opinion is more important than recruitment because it's a heck of a lot easier to fill buckets than it is colanders. If you look at retention from the beginning, it starts in the attraction phase by making sure that our real corporate culture is represented in all of our outbound marketing so that the right candidate is drawn to us and the wrong candidate is repelled by that marketing. That is continued in the recruitment process. So who's the right candidate? Number one, someone whose desires for their next role align with the role we're trying to fill. So we should be asking them questions like, what are you looking to accomplish in your next role? What's your desired career path? Those things have to be in alignment. We need to also make sure that the mission and values of our company are in alignment with the personal values and the goals of that person. So I'll use a silly example, I guess, would be if you're a defense contractor that's building weapons for the military, you probably wouldn't work well with someone who's anti-military because your values and their values will be in conflict. Now, that's not a 100% hard and fast rule, or there might be circumstances where they said it's not accurate, but I think as an example, it stands. So these types of questions need to be asked early on. And here's the thing to remember, folks. If these things aren't in alignment, then their skills don't matter. If they're 100% skill match, but they would be miserable in your company, they're going to bounce out in 3 to 6 months. And as I mentioned in the attraction phase, one of the things that you're looking for when people end is their tenure. And if they're very short term, most often that means there were cultural mismatches. They were expecting one thing when they accepted the job and they saw another. Or they never really ended their job search and something better for them came along. The first one we have more control over, so we want to make sure that we're doing the things that will minimize, if not fully prevent that. So the thing we want to remember here in our interview phase is that we need to focus on what they're looking to achieve and what is in alignment for them and us. Now, the final part, the offer section of this, is the last step in the recruitment process. And you'll notice offer piece is a separate key element. You might be tempted to think the offer is just the last step of the interview process. No, it's its own thing. The offer, you need to remember this piece. The further into the interview process a person gets, the more emotionally involved that they become. When they get to the offer stage, those emotions will typically, in most people, be at their highest. And what do we know about people that are heavily emotionally involved in something? They're less likely to be rational. They're more likely to be making emotional decisions, and they're easy to upset. And you see this very, very often when you're hiring. You get to the end, you're ready, in that offer phase, deciding between 2, 3, 4 candidates on who you want to make the offer to, and somebody blows up. They come back after a couple days with an ugly email saying that they're not interested or whatever. And that blow up comes from their emotions being engaged and them not getting what they expected. So how do we mitigate that? Feedback and sharing the process. So the more that people understand how things are going to be, the more we say things like, So, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate, I'm going to present you to the hiring manager now. I think that you're a strong match for this role, but I don't have decision-making authority on this. The way this is going to work is they're going to give me feedback on your resume and whether they're interested in your candidacy within 48 hours. It typically takes us a week and a half to 2 weeks to go through the 3 interviews. At each one of those, if that manager doesn't want to move forward, they'll let me know and I'll share whatever information that I have. Again, I can't say yes or no, but my commitment to you is that I'll give you whatever feedback I get as soon as I get it, whether it's good or bad. Does that sound fair, Mr. and Mrs. Candidate? They will say yes, because that is an implicitly fair monologue. And then you wrap up with this. If I might ask for something in return, if for whatever reason you decide that you wouldn't like to move forward, that this role is not for you, or you decide to accept another role, please let me know so I can end your candidacy. Would that be fair to ask? And they will usually say yes. Whether or not they'll do it is a yes or no thing too, but they will usually say yes there. The offer, you want to reiterate that process. So, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate, this is our last interview. We're all set. I spoke to the hiring manager. They are interested in you and a couple more folks. They want to hold a meeting, which is going to be Tuesday, which is 3 business days from now. And at that meeting, they'll make a decision. As soon as I get that decision, which will likely be that day or early the next, I'll be reaching out to you either with an offer or to let you know that they went with somebody else. Do you understand? By doing that, you're going to skip that ugly email. Why? Because the person understands what is happening. Remember, in emotional situations, a lack of information will usually prompt someone to fill in negative emotions and negative thoughts. Humans are kind of fear-based. And we combat that by, again, doing just this. So how do we effectively handle the offer stage? Share the process, share feedback, and consistently share information. It goes without saying that ghosting is bad. It hurts your employer brand. It's a scummy move. So if this person isn't selected, share with them whatever level of information you're comfortable with. Let them know that the company went another direction and end that space. You never know. That person might be the one you hire the next time this role becomes available, or another role that's similar. So that's the overview of the recruitment phase as it relates to the destination employer process. And this last piece with that offer is to transition all of this information that we learned during the interview and offer phases with the hiring manager, so that when they start the retention, which begins in new hire orientation, when they start that process, they've got it, which is our cue to end today's program and to let you know that next week we're going to wrap up this program with the retention phase. As always, I thank you for listening. If you want to get into more detail on this, go out and check the Destination Employer book on Amazon, or check out our self-paced course of the same name, broken out 5 modules, more than 8 hours of video, hands-on workbooks, so that you've got all the questions that you need in order to implement this process. And that's over at destinationemployer.co. Details for both are down in the description. Until next week when we speak again, go out there and make something awesome, be awesome, and have a great week.